Hi, everyone. I'm Kirsten Wegner with Modern Markets Initiative. Thanks for joining our Brown Bag Lunch series, which we've been hosting throughout 2020. As many people have been kind of more isolated at home, we're bringing some of the key thought leaders from Washington. We've had Jim Angel previously from Georgetown. We've had members of the private sector. And today we're so delighted to have LabCFTC Director Melissa Netram. So thanks for joining us today. We go back over 15 years now. We ran into each other at a conference earlier this year, just as we were cutting our teeth out of law school. So it's just thrilling to see your trajectory, always focused on innovation, through different, angles of innovation. And it seems like, there's so much happening at the LabCFTC right now that the coronavirus hasn't slowed things down from your angle.
Yeah, so, no, definitely.
One of the big events you've coming up is Empower Innovation. That's in, I think, less than 2 weeks away. Can you talk a little bit about what's on your agenda with Empower Innovation?
Sure. Yeah. And so thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And, again, really appreciate the whole idea of full circle. I was saying to Kirsten earlier that, it's something I often tell young people coming up through DC is, the longer you're here in this town, the smaller the town gets, because it really is like a small town. And it was nice to circle back with you 15 plus years later to see your trajectory as well. So so excited for this conversation. First, obviously, I have to give the typical disclaimer. My views are those of my own and not that of the CFTC. But LabCFTC, for those of you who don't know LabCFTC, we've been around for about 3 years now, and we are the innovation arm of the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, which regulates the derivatives markets. Our focus is really to work on advancing policy and regulation, but also innovation, both internally and externally. And so you mentioned Empower Innovation, and that is our new virtual learning series that we're going to be launching September 24th. We've in the past, for those of you who've tracked LabCFTC, we've in the past done a FinTech Forward conference. This is a typical 1 to 2 day conference with all of the industry thought leaders and regulators to talk about new ideas and tech and innovation. Unfortunately, because of the coronavirus, obviously we've had to rethink how we do that. And so that's our Empower Innovation series. It's a 3-part series with events in September, October, and November, focusing on different aspects of technology and innovation. So for the September event, we're going to be talking about technology and innovation in light of the pandemic. It's something obviously on all of our minds, but it's definitely something that I think, one of the good things I think that has come out of the pandemic is the importance of technology, innovation, and thinking forward. And what's next, not only in terms of the CFTC, how we regulate, how we supervise, but also in terms of how our kids go to school, how we go to the doctor. Everything we do in light of the pandemic. And so on the 24th, the chairman is going to be doing a fireside chat, and we'll talk a little bit about the commission's overall initiatives with technology and innovation. And then we will go into a panel discussion and a tech-like talk from some of the industry thought leaders to talk about what some of their companies are doing in light of the pandemic and how technology and innovation has helped. But also, Deloitte is giving a talk on a report that will be coming out with about how technology and innovation has worked in the financial services sector for the pandemic. And so more to come, but if you're interested, we're happy to post the link to the site for you to register.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think, you mentioned LabCFTC is just a couple years old. It's easy to assume it was around for a long time because your agenda is so robust. And having observed what regulators are doing over the year, I think that the CFTC was really one of the first to create this super open door policy where, you saw LabCFTC going out to other cities like in Chicago and California, all around the country over the past few years, and really just opening up the doors that you don't need to hire a lawyer or someone else if you're a startup to talk to the CFTC. You've just opened your doors And the fact that the chairman is attending this fireside chat and that I understand LabCFTC is reporting directly to the chair tells me that this is very top of the agenda for the CFTC, the innovation topic. What is your advice in terms of like engagement, right? I at MMI sometimes get questions from startups, whether it's in the crypto space or otherwise. How do they get to know, their regulators? And I point to CFTC. Is this, if someone is listening to this who's launching a startup, whether it's in the crypto space or blockchain space or otherwise, can they just register and show up? And how simple is it? And what is your advice for people as far as communicating with you and preparing for a meeting with you?
Yeah. So you touched on a couple points that I think are important. First, when I came on board in October, as you mentioned, we were elevated to an official office. This was for the chairman wanted to send a message that, hey, innovation is important and it's important across the entire commission, but also to the market. And as we're thinking about looking forward. And so that has worked out actually over the past year as we had hoped in terms of sitting on senior staff, working closely with other division directors. The other piece just in terms of, and I'll get to how we engage, but if you haven't seen it yet, the commission has put out its strategic plan for 2020 through 2024. And one goal of that is focused entirely on innovation. So it shows the commitment to innovation and how the commission sees how we have to constantly be forward looking. And the chairman himself sees that. It helps from my job perspective to have that support from the top down and from my co-directors in terms of engagement across the commission, but also with staff and working closely on those initiatives. In terms of how we can work closely together with innovators, I'll just say, before I came on board, I actually worked in the private sector at a tech company for almost 10 years. And so I know what it was like on the other side of the table, right? And trying to work with regulators and trying to talk to them about new areas in the financial services space where we weren't a traditional player. And I would say the same thing that putting my Melissa hat on as I would my CFTC hat, which is, the number one thing to do is talk to regulators often and early. The more you can come in and share with us what you're doing and where you're going, the more we can work with you as it gets to the next step. Now, LabCFTC does not give legal advice, nor do we put a stamp of approval on a product. But what we do, and one of the processes that we've changed over the past year, is we ensure that the right people are at the table when you're coming to meet with us. This helps in a number of different ways so that there's not this delay of, oh, you meet with us, then let's bring you back to meet with this division, then let's bring you back to meet with that division. In the tech world, as we all know, in the startup community, time is of the essence. And so we have to do what we can to make sure we get you the answers that you need in a timely fashion. The other thing I would say is, LabCFTC, as you mentioned in the past, we've been all over the country. In fact, I think they've done meetings in both the UK and Singapore as well. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, that our whole agenda for this year had to change because we had plans to go all over the country for our office hours. In the meantime, though, we're continuing to do virtual office hours. And so every Tuesday, we have time set for what we call our office hours. You can go on the CFTC site, and again, we can send you the link, and you can request a meeting at whatever time is appropriate for you. And we'll come back to you with whether or not we need more information or who the right people are at the table. But we still have been, in the light of the pandemic, continuing to meet with startups and innovators as well as well-established players during that time.
Are you seeing any trends during the pandemic of types of companies that are approaching you during the Tuesday hours? Obviously, in a time of uncertainty, there are new businesses that can flourish with some of that opportunity with this gravitation to remote meetings and otherwise. What are some of your observations, if you have any, over the past few months of the types of companies that have been approaching you?
Yeah, so we've had a number of folks that were very early in a startup stage of, I have this idea and I'm not sure where to go with it next. We often see that the U.S. regulatory system can be very, very confusing, as all of you on the call probably know. Is it a commodity? Is it a security? Where does it fall? What do I have to do? So we've had a couple of those situations for sure. What I've seen also in light of the pandemic is we've had a lot of folks come through with just letting us know that they are a tool they are providing in the market, whether for market participants to help them do their job better or help them work more efficiently, or even some reg tech type proposals of things that, hey, as a regulator, you may want to be thinking about doing something like this. And so those have been very interesting types of meetings, not necessarily giving guidance from our end by any way, but this actually accentuates the point of, regulators need to learn from you just as much as you need to learn from us, which is again why it's so important to keep coming back to talk to us early and often. We can only do so much inside our four walls. And while we do try, especially LabCFTC team tries to keep our finger on the pulse on the latest technologies and innovations out there, at the end of the day, you're the ones in the market. You're the ones working with industry every day. And so having that constant awareness of what you're dealing with or what you're seeing, and coming back to us and helping educate us is just as important.
And I know, I think FINRA created last year, was it last year, the year before, an Office of Innovation that I believe Chimera Workie is chairing. And they've had a lot of industry participants also come to their doors and talk about new technologies, let's say with AI. Have you noticed any like AI reg tech trends or otherwise, or AI participants come in? That's always been a kind of hot topic for, people on the Hill at least to learn more about.
Yeah, we have. We've seen a couple different AI tools that have come through, helping to identify, a variety of different things. I'd be remiss not to mention we just closed our Project Street Lamp competition, which was our science competition that we launched, looking for an AI tool to help for enforcement purposes. And so that competition just closed on Friday. We'll be announcing at our November Empower Innovation the winner of that competition. And you'll be able to hear from them in terms of their tool themselves. But yeah, the other thing, you mentioned about FINRA's Innovation Office, SEC has one as well, FinHub, they call it, very similar in terms of office hours and meetings for sure. The one thing I think is really great right now is that we're at this point where almost all the financial regulators in the US either have an innovation office or have an innovation agenda and a goal to create an office. And that's come a long way than 10 years ago, right? When the beginning of tech doing financial services was knocking on the DC door. The other piece is we all coordinate really, really well together, both informally and formally. We're members of the Global Financial Innovation Network, which is about 60 different countries and states and federal regulators working together and sharing information and coordination when it comes to financial innovation. So when I say, talk to regulators often, recognize we also talk to each other to learn from each other. And so, as you're talking to one of us, it doesn't mean you're limiting the conversation with others.
I mean, that makes sense that you guys are talking to global regulators, and it does seem like, at least in the US, there's a sense of pressure to keep American companies competitive in an increasingly global economy, right? And that's something we hear a lot of questions about, from Democrats and Republicans on the Hill. What are ways we can keep our, economy competitive? So it is fascinating. You're sharing that information with other regulators, and I'm sure, the companies here are very incented to, be on the cutting edge of innovation. Do you see any other, big kind of agenda items coming up in the next year beyond Empower Innovation? Are you going to do this competition again next year for a reg tech like approach, or are you taking a wait and see a kind of approach now to see how that went this year? Maybe it's too early to announce next year's competition.
Yeah. It is a little too early. There's a lot that, can change over the next couple months, as
Sure.
we all know. And honestly, with the pandemic, we've had a couple shifts of our priorities because of commission priorities in light of the pandemic. And so,
Absolutely.
I think it may be a little too early to tell. That being said, we're going to continue our efforts in terms of educating. So I can anticipate one, maybe two more primers coming up. These are education documents that we release, giving overviews of areas. We've done them in the past in terms of AI and virtual currencies and smart contracts. A digital asset one is coming shortly. Other areas around the digital asset space may also be coming. We'll continue to engage internally as well. So that's just as important to us as the external facing
Sure.
stuff. And so again, with the pandemic, we've had the opportunity to do over 50 plus training sessions internally. Meeting with folks across the commission to talk to them about what is blockchain, what is Bitcoin, what is Ether, what is digital assets, what are, how do we look at that? And that's just as important because, as we're starting to look at how does this new technology and innovation fit into our typical regulatory structure, having that knowledge at hand is so important as we're thinking about how we change or if we change those regulations.
I think, well, thank you for that preview. We're always waiting very curiously to see what is next on the agenda of LabCFTC. But I think, focusing on, the main conversation topic of Empower Innovation, you're really going to have guests looking at how technology innovation have helped the market stay kind of resilient during a crisis, which has been kind of the overarching, I'd say, theme of many of our MMI brown bag lunches over the past few months, and how technology can help rebuild from a crisis, right? And I feel like the sense I'm getting from a lot of industry participants is that the markets functioned quite resiliently, that the markets were able to stay open, none of the exchanges had to close. So I'll be very curious to hear what your panelists say in 2 weeks about their sense of the role of technology in keeping the markets open during a crisis and rebuilding from a crisis.
Yeah, and the commission itself has been very active. If you followed any of our meetings and commission meetings that we have been having, especially since March, right? Since we've been home, it's still business as usual. A significant amount of rules and regulations have been have been out the door, either in terms of proposed or final stages. And so that's still continuing. And I think, again, a credit to technology and innovation, the ability that we can all work remotely it is a big piece of it. After the September session for Empower Innovation, on the October session, it'll be in coordination with DC FinTech Week, and that'll be focused on how regulators themselves think of innovation. And then November is the forward-thinking one we were just talking about, right? How technology and innovation can help us and help shape the future of finance. And so more to come on the agendas for the October and November one, but the September one is posted on our site.
Great. And I think DC FinTech Week that's hosted by Chris Brummer, right? Am I correct in that? Yeah, he's done a fantastic job in building out kind of that innovator community. So shout out to him. He's put a lot of people together on different really important innovation topics.
100%, and really great agenda coming out of DC FinTech Week. I'm not sure how much of it is live yet, but he's working very closely on that. It's through Georgetown University, so highly recommend anyone on the call, and it'll be all virtual, so anyone on the call interested to listen into that as well.
So I'm interested, if it's okay with you, switching gears to some of your more personal story of you've gotten this huge leadership trajectory as a woman, and I know you've been very active in promoting other women in financial services and fintech. If you were to give a couple pieces of advice to women who are seeking a career path similar to yours or leadership roles, whether it's in the private sector or government, what would you advise them?
Yeah, this is something that I'm very passionate about. I'm a big believer of if women and how far we can all keep going. And it started early in my career, actually, when you and I first worked together, when I was over at McGraw-Hill, Standard & Poor's. My boss, my mentor at the time was a woman, and she gave me a piece of advice that I still stand by today, which is if you're at the table, make sure you're heard. And that's something that I think we take for granted sometimes, that we're at the table and in meetings and we may not be speaking up, maybe don't have anything to add, but always making sure you say one comment so if people know that you're there. And because if you're at the table, you know, you deserve to be there. And so that's something that's resonated with me throughout my career. And another piece of advice is, I would say, always be open to new opportunities. Always say yes, and always build relationships, right? You know, we just talked about 15 years ago, you and I worked together, and 15 years later, we you know, reconnected. Having those types of background and relationships where we knew you and I worked really well together 15 plus years ago, early in our career. Hey, we can work really well together now because we have that history, right? The same goes true with anyone. As I mentioned, DC is a very small town, right? So it just you keep working with that. In terms of, you know, always say yes, in terms of talking to people, right? If someone calls you and says, hey, would you be interested in talking to so-and-so about an opportunity? Always say yes. It may not be the right opportunity for you. It may not be the right time for you to leave wherever you are, but you're still building another connection, another relationship, so that in the future, that may be something down the road. That's honestly, you know, I think about where I am today. You know, a lot of the positions I've had in my career here, 20 years in DC, have been as a result of saying yes because somebody said, hey, would you be interested in talking to somebody? My predecessor, Dan Gorfine, is actually a very good friend of mine. We've worked together for over 10 years, and he called me when he was on his way out the door and said, hey, would you be interested in talking to the chairman about a possible opportunity to take over as I'm leaving? And again, I wasn't sure. Is it the right opportunity? Is it the right time? But sure, I'll have a conversation, right? And it was from that conversation, when I saw the passion and devotion to innovation that the chairman had, that I realized this may be the right time for me to make that move back to government. And so those are two pieces of advice that I would give to anyone starting early in their career. And obviously, you know, the relationship piece is such a core part of it.
And that's one, I'd say, issue I've been looking at and advising younger people who are just, you know, graduating from college or entering their career. I think working on relationships can be challenging in the time of being in quarantine. And I think this is a time where, you know, friends I have whose kids are graduating from college, or, you know, people just, you know, starting their careers, you know, I think finding pathways for people to meet other people online is great. So it's nice, I think, for especially startups, young startups, to know they can come and talk on like Tuesdays to LabCFTC, or perhaps join in, you know, the DC FinTech, you know, conference that's coming up, and find some breakout sessions or some new, more creative, virtual, innovative ways to get to know people. You know, and on that note, I invite, you know, any people who might be watching this to definitely reach out to me who want to learn more about, you know, FinTech or innovation as well. But these are really good pieces of advice, I think, and you clearly put some thought into this, you know, trajectory of your own, and helping other people, you know, to pay it forward as well. So that is, I think, really important.
Yeah, the other thing I would just say to the younger, you know, if I had to go back to my younger self in terms of over analyzing, should I reach out to so-and-so or not? I would say, you know, think to yourself, what's the worst that's going to happen? Is that they're going to say, no, they don't have time to talk to you. Informational interviews or informational meetings, just reaching out to people through LinkedIn, which, you know, wasn't as big, you know, 15 years ago when you and I first started. But, you know, reaching out to people just to say, hey, do you have time for a virtual coffee, 20 minutes, just to get to know about your career and how you got there, is just as important. And I, you know, don't be embarrassed or afraid that what's going to come out of that.
And you've obviously done quite a bit of, you know, speaking at conferences. Being director of LabCFTC is a pretty public, you know, position to be in. I met you at a conference where you were speaking on a panel. I was on a different panel. Have you always been comfortable speaking in public, in front of audiences, or is that a skill you've developed over the years? And what advice do you have to people kind of at the start of their careers who might be wanting to improve that aspect of their professional lives?
Yeah, I think I've been somewhat comfortable. Actually, in my going back to the McGraw-Hill days, I participated in the Toastmasters, which I highly recommend because it really makes you more focused on getting to the point, but also keeping track of your ums and uhs and likes, which is something that is very common for all of us as we're thinking through, what should I say next? How do I go there? Being more confident about how you're speaking without saying those uhs and ahs is so important too, especially I think for younger women, when you're having that seat at the table and you're making sure that, you know, you're heard without the ums and the ahs, so you don't look you know, you don't look younger, younger, and that you don't deserve to be at the table. So I would highly recommend Toastmasters to a lot of people. I just said, I track it.
I'm going to
And
start doing it. We've got only 5 minutes left, and I'm going to start saying us and buzz.
yeah.
I'll say it again. Well, I think that's all really great to hear, because just moving it back to the innovation theme, you know, when people have a business idea, there's the idea in their head and the kind of the business strategy, and then there's a separate importance of communicating, you know, what you're thinking of doing to your regulator, and there's kind of an art to that communication. So getting in early, forming the relationship, communicating the business idea, and getting feedback from a regulator, like, you know, I think LabCFTC is the perfect kind of intermediary to do that, and the perfect kind of open forum where people can kind of practice communicating their business ideas. Because I talked to countless kind of fintech innovators who are young startups, and they'll be like asking for initial advice. And I think there seems to be this formality before going to talk to a regulator that you need a lawyer there or need a huge presence. But sometimes it's about being pointed just simply in the right direction of the right people to talk to within the CFTC or SEC, if it's unclear who your regulator might be, if it's like cryptocurrency, for example. So
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And there are many times in our meetings, honestly, that we recommend them going to talk to a lawyer
yeah.
because we can't give legal advice, but we let them know, like, listen, there are people out there that specialize in this stuff. And so they can help you navigate this as you're finalizing your product. But being clear about what you're going to be doing and where you're thinking and where you're going when you're coming to meet with us really helps in our communication and helping you get the answers you need during the office hours, for sure.
Well, this is great information. Thank you so much for being our guest. You're so, I think, approachable I hope people feel that LabCFTC is approachable to speak with, that they don't need to be intimidated to talk to LabCFTC, and that you're a huge resource for innovators. So thank you so much for joining today. We really appreciate everyone who's watching. You could watch this at Modern Markets. Follow us on Twitter. We'll be posting it on YouTube. So thanks so much, Melissa.
No, thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thanks.